I welcome the opportunity afforded by my colleague Deputy O'Keefe to highlight the plight of the agricultural sector. That plight is one of some positives, yes, but unfortunately some negatives. And contrary to what Deputy Hayes had to say here last night, our job as public representatives in the first instance is to articulate and inform government on behalf of those who gave us the privilege and the opportunity to do so, and in doing that to inform and seek to have policy derived from those representations by our constituents. And in a predominantly rural constituency such as my own, I am obviously in receipt of much representations from the farming community and their industry representatives. Yesterday, as many speakers alluded to, there was a fantastic investment by Kerry Group by virtue of their announcement of up to 900 jobs in Kildare with 400 temporary construction jobs. Such investments by an indigenous but global market leader in Ireland is testament to the quality of the Irish food producing sector in this country. It is testament to the commitment and to the excellence and the contribution that the farming sector and the agricultural sector makes to the Irish economy. But more importantly, it may be testament and recognition of the principles of the Food Harvest 2020 programme, initiated and delivered in conjunction and cooperation with farming bodies by the previous Minister Smith. That programme, as you know, is underpinned by three core principles you mentioned yourself here last night, that being smart farming, green farming and sustainable farming. And I want to acknowledge and compliment you, Minister, for your commitment to Food Harvest 2020 and maintaining that policy drives agriculture towards the targets within it. That being the main one, being the growth by up to 42% of food production by 2020. And I want to acknowledge also that there has been progress, and despite some blips in relation to price, whether it be in milk and beef at present in relation to factory prices, that up to 19% improvements have been made. And we acknowledge that. And we acknowledge that 10% of the projected 42% growth in food production has also been made. And we're well aware of the importance of our exports to this economy. We're well aware that agriculture plays a huge part in that. And we're well aware of the fact that the beef industry and the milk producing industry contributes greatly, and we are world leaders, in fact, in relation to not only in relation to our exports to Europe, but indeed to world markets. But we can get lost in all that hype too. And when we talk about the broader economy and the great performance of our exports, we must acknowledge that 60% of those exports are, for example, from the pharmaceutical and chemical industries. And while that contribution is well received and widely acknowledged, we must remember it is not necessarily a great provider of jobs, we'd say. But it is important when discussing this motion and the performance of the agricultural sector, and to give credit where credit is due and acknowledge the contribution that you have made and your department have made in the improvements that we've highlighted. We must also, as any credible opposition would do, highlight your failings, highlight the deficiencies that we see in the way in which you are managing your department and you are delivering to the constituents or to the constituents that the Taoiseach gave you the privilege of delivering to. And we must, as Deputy O'Keefe has said, highlight the fact that in these austere times, in these difficult times of budgetary processes, we must highlight the fact that there was 200 million of an underspend by the Department of Agriculture in relation to the budget that was promised last year. We must highlight the fact that this could have addressed the failings that we now see in your AEOS scheme.
1 minute, please.
We must highlight the fact that it could have compensated for the failures that we have seen in your delivery of any fodder scheme for weather-affected areas and failures to address the diesel pricing system, as Deputy Collins has mentioned. We must highlight the fact that that funding could have helped towards the failings that we've seen in your delivery to the disadvantaged area system. In addition, this government has also hit rural communities in other ways and other means by virtue of the last year's budget, in relation to rural communities, rural schools, rural transport. And I'm also calling you now, under the auspices of this motion, to finally rubbish and banish the proposals mooted by Minister Quinn to include farm buildings in education grants. And leaving failings aside, the main reason we put forward this motion And we didn't mention CAP, as you mentioned last night. And we didn't do so for a technical reason. By virtue of the fact, should we feel that you are not performing the duties that we want you to perform in achieving a 1.6 billion envelope, that we will not be hamstrung by virtue of the rules and regulations of this Dáil to bring forward another motion that might deal with CAP at that time. But we will hold that in reserve, and we will be watching very closely, because we have not only taken the message yesterday, we are taking the message regularly from our constituencies, regularly from farming organisations and farming communities and our neighbours and our friends that we live and reside with.
Thanks,
that
Deputy.
you must, on behalf of the farming of this country, come back from Brussels with a 1.6 billion envelope, which is in itself, in real terms, a great reduction. And that must be acknowledged, and the rest of the people of the country must know that too.
Thanks very much.
And you also have a responsibility to deliver to that sector and to that community in this year's budget as Minister for Agriculture, because if you fail to do that, you are failing to acknowledge the input that that sector makes to our society and to our economy at these depressed times.